will be fine. Dear colleagues, dear guests, welcome to this IFIAC webinar. Thank you for being with us today on a Friday. Today we are hosting Alina Bychkova, who's a PhD student at Nottingham Trent University in the UK. Alina recently co-authored an article on Kazakhstan's climate change policy, which was published in the journal Post-Communist Economies. And today she will be presenting her research entitled Understanding Climate Change Narratives in Central Asia, Science, Politics and Media Discussions. So we already see by the title that you broadened the scope of your analysis. Your publication recently was about Kazakhstan, whereas now you will be talking about the whole region for roughly half an hour, right? Or maybe a little more. Then we will have a Q&A session. And I see already 23 people connected. So I suppose it's going to be lively. So please, Alina, thank you again for accepting our invitation, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Just a second to share my screen. Second. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. So today I will be, thank you, Adrian, for giving me a word, and I will be talking about climate change communication in Central Asia. Like, my topic is broad. I mean, it's not broad, but it's very complex. So I looking at the narratives, how climate change is talked about in Central Asia, and I'm taking examples. The case studies are 3 countries. It's Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan, because this has been just a bit to narrow the scope of the study. And in that countries, I look at how climate change is talked about in science, in politics, in media, and also in NGOs. And then I'm looking at the possibilities, how those countries can communicate climate change, the global issue, on the regional level, because the problem is pretty much urgent for the whole region, yet there has been not that much communication between those countries. And actually we could see some conflicts, for example, over water issues, very really tense in Central Asia, instead of actually cooperation. Just to explain a little bit, when I'm looking at science, politics, media, and NGOs, is because science, I see it as a main actor of knowledge production. So science produces all the data, everything that we know today about climate change, and it's essential, of course, because the policymakers can then make decisions based on that knowledge. Well, coming to policymakers, they are, of course, essential in this process of climate mitigation and adaptation, because they actually can enact some strategies. They can make people basically act on climate change. And also, policymakers are important at the global level, because they are enacting that global response to climate change, communicating on the international political arena. Then media, very important here as well, because they act as a channel between the state, between science and public. They communicate, they are responsible for public awareness. What do we know about climate change? Our understanding, how should we act on climate change? Also, media is important because it can act as a watchdog not in all the countries, and I'll come to that point later, but it actually can channel to the state what people think, what are the public concerns, and so they can shape their governmental response to the issue. And NGOs here represent public agency, and what the public thinks about the issue, and how public wants to act on that, and what they want from the government. Well, next slide. Yeah, just a bit before coming to my research questions, I want to introduce Central Asia in the context of climate change. As you see on the map, it's a landlocked region, so it doesn't have direct access to the big waters. It's Caspian Sea, but yeah, we don't consider it as a big water. And it is covered in steppes and deserts, so forest, of course, as well, and it features arid and semi-arid climate, and also is surrounded by mountains. All of that makes it very much vulnerable to climate change. It's one of the most vulnerable regions in the world. So the effects of climate change are expected to be really tough for Central Asia. So under the worst scenario, it's projected almost 6 degrees increase in temperatures by 2085, which of course will surely impact social security, economic security. So the main issues are food security, because the region is dependent on agriculture. Then it's freshwater security. It's already, we can see the conflicts between the countries based on this access to water, because there are also the issue that there are some upstream countries like Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and downstream countries like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. They dependent on those water flows from the upstream countries. And with all the severe increase in the glacial melts and glacial runoffs, the water the water flows are really unpredictable. So there are sometimes droughts, sometimes floods, and this all makes it very difficult to manage the water resources. And yet it's important that Central Asia doesn't contribute much to climate change. Like if we compare it at the international level, just 0.5% of all that emissions, greenhouse emissions produced at the global in the global level yearly. Okay, and here I want to bring the point of the government in this conversation, because those states of Central Asia, they all considered authoritarian, as latest rating of Freedom House said us. Only one exception was Kyrgyzstan till this year, actually, because after the recent elections in 2020, which been not considered to be democratic, it lost that rating of being partly free and again fell to the category of authoritarian states. So those countries, at different extent, with the, so I look at the Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan is considered the most authoritarian of them. Then it's Kazakhstan, and the most close to democracy would be Kyrgyzstan. So at different extent, these countries, they feature hierarchical decision making, where the president is responsible for all the decisions, even in climate policies. And it's actually a very big issue, because the people who are not experts in the issue, they have power to make decisions, and many times their decisions advised not by the state of science, what's going on with climate change, but by some interests in international politics, in financial interests like fossil fuel production, because all the countries, they are developing, and the developing economies majorly rely on fossil fuels, but Kyrgyzstan here is exception. So the NGOs are government-backed, so they're owned by the state, and often they just created by the state to attract some international financial flows. Either they are marginalized, so they are suppressed, activists, environmental activists getting oppressed by the government quite often. Also, this is was the term scientific closure for Uzbekistan, but basically what it means that in authoritarian states, scientists are restrained their activity, and it's hard for them to engage with their foreign colleagues. This is not the case for all the countries, but recently it was. So the scientific development at the moment, which remains quite low. Its measure reflects these political conditions. And also there is a state-backed media. So majority of media in Central Asia are owned by the government, and they reinforce the political agenda. So it makes them really hard to spread the knowledge about climate change if the state actually is not concerned about that. So this was the context. I would say that authoritarian regime makes it more difficult to proceed with climate change adaptation. And here I come to my research questions, which are some looking at the meanings of climate change, how those discourses, those narratives of climate change are constructed in Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan. What are those interests behind the how climate change is talked about, how ideology influence climate change conversations. And looking at communication, I want to, this time, because this area is under-researched, like Central Asia, in terms of climate change communication, climate change policies, I will talk about it a bit later. So I want just to be like, it will be one of the first drops in the ocean in this field. And I will look at those problems in communication, and I will try to identify them. So later we can build more research, and to hopefully it will help to develop better policies and better response to climate change. But of course, with this research, I already hope to give some recommendations to the regional decision makers, stakeholders, and hopefully it will make some change. Yeah, and last I will look at the regional scale, how can be communication at the regional scale can be improved. What I'm thinking at the moment, my hypothesis. So the first one is that state ideology and some interests behind, like those economic interests mentioned before, that I think that they determine how climate change is discussed at the levels of those countries. And there are three hypotheses about the countries. So in Kazakhstan, it's recently been very active in climate change policy, at least in their discourse, how they present their policy on the international level. And I assume here that it's a big reason for that. It's economic gains, which means here two important things: that dependence on fossil fuels that they have at the moment, it's neighboring with a concern about the end of hydrocarbon era, so that all countries are switching to net zero, introduce carbon taxes. So Kazakhstan wants to diversify their economy to avoid future economic shocks. And also the development of renewable energy industry, for instance, will attract more foreign support, financial support to the country. And also it's important for the state, it's their image on the global political arena. So when they show themselves as a Central Asian leader in climate change mitigation, this adds to their political status in the global arena. Okay, coming to Kyrgyzstan, this is the most country with the biggest democratic attitude in the region, and their interest in climate change mitigation, it's primarily concerned about the issue because it hits hard the agriculture country that depends highly still on agriculture. It's their interest in a closer relationship with European Union, which will, which climate change mitigation brings a perfect opportunity to communicate better and to be like in a better relationship. And also there are insufficient economic resources to fight climate change just in the country. So escalated concern demonstrated at the global level will also attract some money for mitigation. Last, in Uzbekistan, climate change is actually, although now they've been showing concern, and I will talk about it later, still it's very restricted. The scientific knowledge there is limited, public agency is limited, and it's because it had the hardest authoritarian rule. So these countries suppose they have more barriers to establish good policies exactly based on these authoritarian conditions. Okay, so about the research in the area, there's been a lot of research going on from the climate scientists and in terms of renewable energy development, in terms of exceptional vulnerability of the region. But there has been not much research in policy sciences, in communication sciences. So I just pop on the screen some examples what has been researched, and it's not just examples, it's basically everything that exists to date in the region. So there's some research on media reporting at the regional level. I would say that media reporting is the most researched topic in all this complex communication field. And Kazakhstan features biggest interest of researchers, actually. So me and Mariana Bychkova, we've been looking at climate change policy in Kazakhstan. Also, Mariana with her colleague, they've been looking at the media coverage in Kazakhstan of climate change. Also, there's been some research of the environmental protests, including climate change protests in Kazakhstan, and environmental journalism. What are the barriers journalists facing, and what are those initiatives to make it better? And in Kyrgyzstan, there have been research also in environmental journalism, or the problems that journalists face basically from the state daily, and about some public activism also in terms of resistance which state demonstrate in terms of public activism and climate change. And Uzbekistan remains least researched, and I would say that the quality of the papers, it's not great, and they are not even zero of them is published in English. So for the international community, it would be hard to see what's going on there, and it's definitely reflects that scientific closure, exclusion of scientists from the international agenda that I was talking before. Okay, coming to my theory and methodology, I will try to be brief here. So I see climate change here as a social construct. What does that mean? That what we know about climate change, it's pretty much is packed in language. What we talk creates our knowledge about the natural, objective issue. So this is not that actually comes not that important what the natural issue is. It comes important how it is talked about. I look here, I bring the concept of power knowledge. It's a very famous concept introduced by French postmodernist Michel Foucault. So it means that ideology in a certain society, in the country, it is influence knowledge. What do we know about the issue? And this knowledge is represented to people through language. So political elite officials, they have big power in what we know and how to act on issues. From this concept of power and knowledge, it was establishing a big methodology field, which is critical discourse analysis. It's analysis of speech and text, like a written text and oral text. And so they look how those meanings are constructed, and they're looking behind, they're looking what are those interests and probably ideologies behind how the issue is talked about. This ideological discourse analysis, it's just a strand of critical discourse analysis. So it's just a bigger emphasis on the ideological factors that influence what we know about the issue. So I was adopting the analysis kit from the Portuguese researcher Ana Carvalho, who made brilliant research on climate change discourses in UK, using that. Okay, my data will be, so I'm looking at, it's a two main steps. It's critical discourse analysis mentioned before of texts, it's media articles and official documents. So official documents, and it's those important in terms of climate policy, where the state discussing climate change at some point. And media articles, I just take from 2010 only. So official documents I take from 1991 after countries been close to independence. And media articles I look at from 2010 just because of the availability of the data. And yeah, and there's been a lot of articles, so I hope with this time period, as I've seen, I'm covering all important things. Of course, I don't look at all the articles from 2010. I look at some amount of articles among the important political events in each country. So it's roughly 3 events per country, and I look how they've been discussed, and climate change was discussed around those events, and how the meanings been changing over time. Second important part is expert interviews. So I'm talking with policymakers, with climate scientists, with media workers, journalists, with representatives of NGOs and other experts, for example, experts who work in the industries, asking them those important questions about how climate change is communicated and what is the state of climate change in those countries. It will be like approximately 45 interviews in total. So far I collected for Kazakhstan 15 interviews, but when I will be coming for the field work there, I still plan to collect just a little bit. Okay, and now just I want to introduce briefly 3 countries and a bit more details about Kazakhstan, because I already finished the case study, so I have some conclusions coming about communication coming from there. So this is very briefly the profile. That is, this country is big one. It's 9th largest country in the world. It's a big player, like it's a big actor on the regional landscape. It's vulnerable to climate change, and if we think that it is one of the biggest wheat producers, it's 5th largest wheat producer in the world. So it's agriculture definitely important for the country, and climate change impacts can be severe for that area. Also, and the decrease in harvest can reach 49% by 2050s, which is really bad, and will definitely impact the social security sector, because people are marginally like employed in the area of agriculture. And here I want to show it's also a developing country which is majorly depends on fossil fuel resources that they own. So here is like a little comparison of climate change aspirations, mitigation aspirations of the state. So they've been submitting their national determined contributions under the Paris Agreement. So they want to reduce their impact their emissions 15% by 2030, or conditional, it means with the help of international actors, they're planning to decrease by 25% by 2030. And actually, Kazakhstan plans to achieve carbon neutrality by 2060 by developing the renewable energy sector, planting trees, so they act as a carbon sink in the country, and probably improve their energy efficiency, because most of the industries of the coal mining productions, they're outdated, and the facilities that they own are still from the Soviet period, and they're not in the good condition. And also, while we see these impressive goals the state posed themselves, we still see that the country, again, this is mainly dependent economic-wise on the export of fossil fuels, on this fossil fuel-based economy. We see it as 9th largest exporter of crude oil in the world. And while we see this aspiration on climate change, right, on the decreasing emissions, we still see that oil production just reached its peak 2019, and it's planned to be increasing still. Gas production also increased, and coal also still amounts for 70% of electricity generation in the country. And coal, as we know, is the dirtiest of the fossil fuels one can imagine. So the state basically wants to not giving up on the fossil fuels economy. They want to achieve their aims by diversifying the economy with renewable energy, and like this, avoiding the financial crisis posed by the net zero future of all those European countries that they're their main buyers of their fossil fuels. I hope it's clear because I was talking fast. Okay, so and here some just a little bit of conclusions about what are main actors and what is the communication in the country. So politics. Well, with these aspirations, I think that climate change mitigation is really restrained still at the level of politics, because economic interests, they outweigh the climate change concern in the country. President, as I was saying before, is a key decision maker, and decisions about climate change and mitigation, they're taken more like Kazakhstan. Looking at the examples, what did China say, what European Union was saying at that point. And so this is their politics, it's very image focused. So it's important for the country to present themselves as a big international players, and the decisions in the climate sphere are majorly advised by those aspirations, image aspiration rather than scientific advice. Scientists have been saying that while they are formally allowed to advise the state, they are majorly excluded from actual decision making, and they disagree with lots of decisions being taken by the state. And you see, like I popped a quote there above that still, while there's those aspirations to build renewable sector, to increase energy efficiency, the state still thinks that this green path, it's pretty much temporary thing, and European Union and other countries will return to the rich resources of Kazakhstan sooner or later, and Kazakhstan actually will get some points at this in this situation, because it will be like getting more influence over the countries, because it will be having resources, and in other countries no. Okay, and what about science? Science and climate science in Kazakhstan, it features low potential. Climate scientists themselves been saying that their colleagues, like their community is quite weak, simply because they don't have enough of financial support from the state. They have to ask for that support. They are basically, like in the past 3 years, they've been saying there have been no support almost, and important money flows come from the international donors. At the same time, the state is pretty much interested in the foreign experts. It brings foreign experts to work on the climate change projects in the country. And so the national experts, they becoming like majorly excluded from that. Why is that? Is because the state is interested in this, it features multi-vector policy, which means like it wants to be friends with the foreign, like with the other countries, and this bringing the experts makes them kind of brings potential of closer connections with other countries, and also definitely state is aware that expertise in the European Union, for example, is better, right, in the climate change. So it doesn't help developing national science at all. Also, there is poor communication with the media, between scientists and media. Media doesn't know, journalists don't know about the scientists, that they are here, and indeed, scientists are probably like, it was scientists who were saying me that climatologists are so weak in the country that journalists just disregard them as experts. I'm not sure how true is that, but that's what I've been said. And also, as I was saying, little influence scientists have on the political level. Coming to media, media is majorly state-centered in the country, owned by the state. There are some alternative media, but they're really few. They're not financed by the state. There's like big one. It's Vlast, that was in my analysis. And so this media agenda is state-censored, and they basically promote, they say what is said on the government level. We can see the narratives of the national pride, that how Nazarbayev and Tokayev are great leaders, how country is strong, and we can see any critics of climate action of the country. You can only see it in that alternative media. Actually, it's interesting because that last alternative media, it was first print, but then it had to go just online because of the lack of financing, definitely. And then we see if the issue is not on the political agenda or it's very shown from a certain side on the political agenda, it will be shown from the same side in the state-owned media. This creates a major barrier for the people actually to understand what's going on in the country climate-wise. Okay, and NGOs are not proactive in the country. There are no NGOs who would be working on climate change solely. And most of NGOs are government-owned, as I was saying. And it is interesting concept, like Tokayev introduced when he came to the presidency in 2019, he introduced the concept of the listening state, that the state is interested about what people actually think, what NGOs who represent the public opinion, what do they think? Although we've been said that this is very selective, so the state listens only to those who they want to hear. Now it is young climate activists, like internet influencers who are still government-backed and very much, their opinion being constructed by what they've seen from the government agenda. And those experts who are many years in the field, their opinion is disregarded, and most of them just now work on their own. They're not part of any NGO, or they just gave up on climate activism in the country. And also public concern is mainly not the climate change, but air and water pollution, because it's those issues that we can really see, like in Almaty, in Astana, the air is so dirty of the coal production. So people, of course, for them, it's the first concern, not some abstract climate change. As I say, it's a problem of the wealthy European countries, not of Kazakhstan. That was about Kazakhstan. And what is the time? I got like, did I get it like 10 minutes? Yeah.
Let me check, because I put my timer, so to be precise. Well, it's already been 30 minutes, but you can at least,
okay.
How much do you think you need?
I don't need much like this. I need like
Okay, let's try.
Because it's just one case study I finished, so I will be looking at Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan. So Kyrgyzstan is exceptionally vulnerable to climate change. I just would say that, okay? And it's the poorest country, second poorest country in the region. Tajikistan is more poor. And what is the problem? It's also underdeveloped science, just because of the lack of financing in the area. Media covers the issue only like when something important political event is going on, so the coverage is really low. Quality of media reporting is low. Journalists don't receive much training on how to communicate the issue, and they don't, many of them don't really know what the climate change is about. It's hard for them to write about it. There is no established institutional protection for the journalists, so it's hard to say something which opposes the opinion of the state. But recently, with the coming of Mirziyoyev being a president, there has been more attention to the issue, and NGOs have been receiving more prominence and given more role in climate change mitigation. But still, that NGOs are very much advised by the government. Yeah. And in Uzbekistan, this is very big country as well. It's very vulnerable to climate change. It depends on their gas production, the cotton production. So their cotton production would be very much threatened by climate change in the future. Also, they have big problems in how they manage their water resources. They cause worst water waster, as they use 90% of the surface water is used actually for irrigating cotton, and it's already 13% water deficit per capita in the country. Yeah, and actually it's interesting because Uzbekistan recently updated its determined contribution at the global level just in 2021, saying that now they will be decreasing their emissions by 35% from 2010 level by 2030. And it's only one country who didn't bring these conditional aims, which means that they need any external support for that. So this country is the least featuring their need in international foreign finance flows. Yeah, and the climate policy, the oil policy, it's very disintegrated. I didn't actually mention that point is important because in all those countries, decision making coming from the top of the government, and it doesn't really adjust for the local governments. It doesn't give power to the local governments. It makes it all difficult to manage climate change. And the ministry, the institution who works, takes decisions, are very much excluded from each other. So they have like an ethics. They say it comes from the Soviet Union. Don't mess with the business of another ministry. But it doesn't work in the case of climate change because it's such a complex problem. There is no single ministry who can solve the issue without cooperation, right? So media in Uzbekistan, it's very much based on what the states say. They don't have independent media. I'm so sorry, I'm confused. I confused the country. So in Uzbekistan, yeah, public agency is receiving more importance lately. And in Kyrgyzstan, of course, it's been receiving more importance, but it was happening already, started before. Yeah, scientific closure, as I was saying, low capacity of science, and NGOs becomes important, but only in governmental rhetoric. They're still government based, and in Kyrgyzstan is the most free NGOs, and they, as that research shows, they could do some change already. And also, it's interesting about Uzbekistan that they have the environmental education initiatives, the strongest of the whole region. That's interesting. Yeah, there's a bit more information, but well, what we say about the region overall first. It should be a slide again. I'm sorry, not very well. So region, there is a problem because there's been all region shares Soviet past. So it has used to be like one entity. Then after the independence, I'll just come to this slide so you don't look at that one. So, but when the countries received independence, the feature, like the urge of making the identities became really high. So now it's like a conflict whether they have to cooperate or still maintain their identities. And I think that this issue of identity and recognizing themselves as the separate states is really important here, why the countries are not really cooperate together on climate change issues. There are more conflicts, like water conflicts, than actual cooperation. Although there have been some initiatives of Uzbekistan to create this water resource management network in the region. There have been initiatives of Kazakhstan to oblige all the region to disclose their emissions from the industries. And there have been more initiatives recently. Like at the COP26 in Glasgow, those countries, all 5 countries of the region, they've been in the pavilion 511, which means 5 regions or 5 countries, 1 region, 1 aim. So they really brought forward the discourse of their communication in the area. But still, I think it needs time to see whether it's a real thing or it's just political discourse, political image. Well, and those communication issues common for at the national levels and also come to the regional level. It is those disintegrated political institutions, hierarchical decision-making, low governmental support to science, exclusion of science from decision-making. It's censorship of media. So media faces some barriers how to develop themselves in climate reporting, and people don't know about the issue then. And NGOs are so influenced by the state, it's hard to make a real change. And yeah, a result of all that, public agency remains low. That is, those issues are prominent for the countries and come all together to at the regional level, where I think that hesitance to act together, it's very much influenced by their aspirations actually to be, for their identity and all of them aspirations to become like a big players at the global level. Okay, I think I will stop here now. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Alina. You perfectly respected the time frame. Very interesting presentation. I discovered some interesting things, mostly concerning Uzbekistan, where actually I was a few weeks ago. And the fact that you mentioned it was the least researched when climate change is concerned is quite interesting to me. There are lots of efforts in terms of water use. I hear many developmental projects. Research, I don't know, but for sure there is activity in this field in Uzbekistan, and also about science, I mean social science for the least. There is a strong willingness to globalize, I mean to make Uzbekistani research go global. But what you notice in your field is that still there is much to be done. This is what I understand. And my impression is that your work has a great potential to make a contribution to the field of Central Asian studies. Some people already use discourse analysis. I would like to mention Diana Kudaibergenova, who worked on presidential discourses in Kazakhstan. And also in another field, technopolitics and about space politics. Nelly Bekus, who worked actually on the technopolitics and space and the discourse about space in Kazakhstan. And I think even if you are working on a different topic, you actually can relate to some of their theoretical frames or the way they approach their objects, at least. This is just an idea, but I don't want to steal too much time, and I would like to give the floor to anyone in the public, because here I'm not a discussant, I'm just a moderator. So, and as also your supervisor is here, with whom I trust you have co-authored a paper. Anyone who would like to ask a question or make a comment, please do so. You can start by either opening your microphone or dropping a line in the chat box. Yes, you can also raise your hand, you're right. So Irene Mastre is here and she would like to ask a question.
Hello.
Thank you for this very interesting presentation. I think it's a field which is really researched, this discourse analysis, this media analysis. So I'm a researcher in geography, and I've been working in Kyrgyzstan. And I'm very interested in what you mentioned, the link between the NGOs and how they form a new understanding about climate change. And also what you said, that the discourse is what frames the understanding, right? And just about that, I wanted to bring maybe a small comment, a small example. So I've been working in the villages in Kyrgyzstan, in the Narin Oblast, and I've seen how people changed their understanding about climate change as NGOs have been coming and talking about it. It doesn't mean that people just absorb what the NGOs say, what's the NGO discourse, because of course they also, I mean, people in the field, they also transform this information. And they also, that was one of the result of my research, that people then also use what they receive from the NGOs and they transform it for their own goals. And then they take this new meaning or this new discourse to lobby their own interest at a higher level. It can be at a national level or even at international level when they are talking with donors or with other organizations. And I'm really interested in what you do because it gives another, how to say that, your research gives me lots of new perspective to understand this kind of dynamics. So yeah, thank you a lot. And I hope I can hear more about your work soon.
Thank you for the comment. And indeed, yes, this, I didn't have very much time to mention this NGOs projects in the region. I know about one amazing project. It's initiated in Kazakhstan by their activists. Probably you heard about him. Bulat Yesekin is his name. And their project, they go to all the region and small local communities, and they bring knowledge how actually to get some heating, not from the burning tree, but another way. So these very practical ways to adapt for climate change. That's amazing. Yes, and I hope this will be more like this. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. This really opens the session of Q&A. I would like, by the way, to suggest that if we achieve to organize a scientific event in Bishkek about climate change, probably in the fall semester of 2022, I do hope that Alina and Irene can actually meet physically in Bishkek. I see a question by Ivan Fukalov and then another one also by Anissa Khasanova. So I'm reading the question by Ivan Fukalov, or maybe he wants to ask it himself. I don't know if he's still here.
Still here, but my oral English, it's not so good.
Okay, so if you want, I can read the question then.
Sure.
Or you can ask me in Russian and I will answer in English.
No, not about this. How do you think the popularization of knowledge about climate change will affect the attitude of the governments of the states to this problem?
Yeah, it's a very good question, actually. It is a complicated one, I think.
Thank you.
Because, yeah, thank you for this question, because it is, if we talk about democracies, it's pretty straightforward, but in the countries with the government, as we see now, it's probably more difficult. But I do believe that mobilization of knowledge will evoke more public agency, and public concern is still a thing, even in the countries where it's more difficult to show. If we take the example of Kazakhstan, if we see that first public, a big public coordination and protest was in related to the use of nuclear energy, and it actually worked at that time in the governmental state. So we can see that it's still possible to influence the state if knowledge, awareness, and agency bringing all together people. I think it's still possible. Yeah, it will be influential. Yeah, if I answered the question.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Great.
Thanks.
Now I see a comment posted by Anissa Khasanova. Thanks for the presentation. When you mentioned that the cars are waiting for some reaction or support from the geopolitical leaders of the region, what do you mean? They are expecting some favors, appraisal. Would you please share on this? So yes, Central Asian republics are waiting for some reaction. What do you mean? And if Anissa Khasanova prefers to, I don't know, give some more detail about her question, she can, of course.
Yeah, so I will just try to rephrase the question to ensure if I understood it correctly. So the republics waiting for some reaction from the presidents, right, or from the leaders in Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. What do you mean? They are expecting some favors, appraisal? I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I understood the question, to be honest.
Maybe our colleague Anissa can ask it again in her own terms.
Sure, I'm sorry for making you confused. It's probably was my fault that I didn't express it correctly. So basically, I meant, if I understood correctly, in some part of the presentation, you mentioned, I think it was in the part about Uzbekistan, that the leaders, they are kind of influenced by geopolitical powers in the region. So they first wait for some kind of reaction from them. So, and of course, this is Russia, China, I think you even mentioned some of them. So what they are waiting for, like, did you understand my question?
Yeah, thank you very much, Ines. Now it's so clear. Yeah, it's probably my fault, so I didn't understand in the beginning. So I'm thinking there's different things they're waiting for, actually. For instance, if we speaking about, this is interesting, like in Kazakhstan, they took that net zero pledge by 2060, just after China introduced their net zero pledge and the European Union did so. So this is dictated, like, it is the question of image, I guess. So this is the example of the geopolitical leaders give them kind of the framework from where they should play. So they shouldn't be too low or too high, because this concern about this importance on the global level is still here. And so I think for their relations with China, this export relation, it's important to have kind of sound political goals. And also, if we're talking about European countries, this demonstrating of aspirations, it will attract more money basically to the country for mitigating the issue. And all the investors, they like goals, actually, because the beautiful goal, it would attract some attention and help. Okay, so I think it's those two: image and money, basically. Yeah, I would answer this way.
Thank you. That's very clear. Anyone else?
May I ask a question?
Yes, Murat Ali Dushanakmunov.
Yes. First of all, thank you very much, Alina, for your very interesting and very wider topic. There is policy, science, and economy, everything is there. Actually, I'm working at the Kyrgyz National University at the at the Faculty of Geography. And my PhD was about glacier retreat in the Tian Shan Mountains under the climate change. That's why this topic was interesting for me, and I'm happy to join to this presentation. And I have small questions. There is, as a geographer, I can't understand how people are understanding. In the very beginning, you was mentioning that our region is landlocked region. What do you mean, landlocked region?
Landlocked region. I would be a bit afraid here to answer the question, because I'm not a geography scientist, but as I understand that it doesn't have a direct access to any big water, you know, so it's logged by another countries. Yeah.
Okay, now it's clear, because once also this term is often used, and once also I was giving to someone, and when I ask about Switzerland, for example, also mountainous country, many glaciers, and that person said that Switzerland is not landlocked, but Kyrgyzstan is landlocked, and both of them mountainous country. And okay, now it's clear. And I want short comment about democracy of Kyrgyzstan. He was mentioning about it several times. Actually, if you look from outside, of course, this democracy level looks like changing by changing our presidents.
Yeah.
But you know, as a local person, I would say democracy is always same, and not depend on our government or president. Depend on local people from public. because during last 1 year, when the new president became as a new president, many times through social media or through NGOs pressed to government, and they changed it. Many questions, this is how to say, democracy is never go down. I would say it will go up. Of course, somehow also this policymakers impacting in some cases, but public democracy, I think, wouldn't change. And
we understand your point. Do you have another question to the speaker?
Yes. I wanted to know which kind of joint relationships or concrete projects do you know between Central Asian countries in direction of climate change? Because there is not so good connections, relationships, for example, all waters are generating in Kyrgyzstan or in Tajikistan, and lowland countries are using water. But as a geographer, I would say that we have to solve this climate change problems together.
Okay. So Alina, what projects do you know, as mentioned by our colleague? And are you well set? Because I think you needed to switch to
yeah, I'm sorry about that, because the construction just came to the window. I couldn't, it was hard to hear any question. But yeah, thank you very much, Vasily, for the comment. It was really interesting, and about the landlocked countries, and so can I just confirm the question is about the projects, right? The mutual between the, like in the region, or between the science and the state?
No, I mean many projects are going on, of course, but joint Central Asian joint projects, concrete projects.
There are some projects. There are some projects on. It's basically on the water security area, and also there is some NGOs projects. So there is like Central Asian Network on Climate Change, and there are also Eastern European countries, for example. So some work is going on, but yeah, it's majorly touched upon the water issues. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, great. I see also another question by our colleague Pierre Chabal, and then Mariana Pabirishskaya. Okay, if Mr. Chabal is here. Okay, maybe he disconnected. So then Mariana, please shoot.
It's not really a question, it's just a brief comment, and I apologize, I have to teach. I'm actually 2 minutes late for my class. But I just wanted to thank your center for inviting Alina and for all of these questions, and just to refer to the very last comment by our colleague in terms of the regional cooperation. As Alina has mentioned briefly in her presentation, the last COP in Glasgow was actually quite an amazing event in terms of from the Central Asian republics, and this really great idea of having them uniting, joining their forces and having one pavilion, one kind of focal point representing 5 republics. And they actually announced quite a few joint projects there together and signed some statements as, that they're going to go forward as working as one, because obviously relatively speaking, they're very small emitters in the global scale, but the adaptation issue is a key problem there, due to their vulnerability in water and so on. And I think this comment on the joint project and cooperation, interregional cooperation, it's really key here. So the very last thing I mentioned, you have Alina's contacts and also my contacts I will leave here. So any comments, any kind of critique or questions, even after this presentation, we are welcome by all means. So thank you very much, and I will disappear now.
It was great to have you, so I hope we can meet again. And I think there was a question by our colleague Pierre Chabal from Le Havre University, west of France.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I wrote my question down because I think it's more precise writing it down. Regarding the Aral Sea, my question is very much the question of someone who is ignorant. But I was wondering whether there was a change over the recent years from the fact that everyone thinks there is an impossibility to replenish or solve the Aral Sea problem, and an evolution towards a possibility. By which I mean technically, of course, but also politically. If the relations between Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan improve, does that mean also that there will be a greater, as we said in French, political will to address the issue? That's my main question. And the sub question is to address the issue regionally among Central Asian partners as a main drive without systematically using international actors.
Well, thank you for the question. It's very interesting. I think it's very important one. And so coming to the Aral Sea, if it will be possible, like to refuse to engineer it unless possible politically, well, I think that as some experts have been talking with mentioned that the Aral Sea is actually the only example of successful climate change mitigation at the regional level. And so we see there, actually I didn't mention, there have been some regional initiatives to work on restoration of the Aral Sea. So I see that actually politically it could be a good opportunity for the region to find some focal point and actually to establish a good cooperation on these terms, because there's also hard to blame one of those countries for what happened to Aral Sea. It can be actually a good point for cooperation. They could all kind of blame Soviet Union for that and work together to solve that environmental devastation that they shared in their common past, I would say. If I answered. And the second,
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Very impressive. Now, there is another question sent in the chat box by former IFAC director Olivier Ferrando, who apologizes because he's on the train. But very stimulating question. He is wondering how the national, regional, and international levels articulate in your research, because he says that climate change is dealt mostly internationally through IPCC reports, COP meetings, etc., while regional cooperation in Eurasia shows a lot of shortcomings, for instance, on water management issue. So how do you analyze and compare discourses produced on climate change by Central Asian actors, officials, journalists, NGOs, etc., during international meetings, okay, and then regional or bilateral discussions? Okay, so how these levels, do they interact, or I don't know?
Yeah, that's a very good question, important one, because I would say that actually in my PhD research, I do not explicitly look at international text, international communications. I'm looking at, I apologize, I didn't mention that, I'm looking at the national levels. And I draw that conclusions about like some recommendation for the international level based on the interviews more and on how the experts see that possibility of cooperation. I look at the national level, I look at the text in the national media, and look at the national policies. So, because if I would look at all of them, indeed, it would be very difficult methodologically. It would be very difficult to compare those levels in these three actors in three countries. That would be like beyond the scope of my project, basically. So I'm looking indeed at the very like at the national level of communication to understand how climate change is spoken inside the country, and then I draw my conclusions from there and guided by the opinions of the experts. Yeah.
Okay, thank you again. Maybe another one or last comment. I don't know. No one sent anything in the chat box. Alina, you still have some energy?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, great. Anyone else? So I can ask a question, but I guess it will be easier for you to answer once you've done fieldwork. And I really hope that very soon we can meet here in the region and probably help you a little if we can. The thing is, one of the members of the public mentioned air pollution as something extremely interesting. You said that in Astana, right?
Yeah.
Because of coal production, it's an issue. I can confirm that in Bishkek, it's really like a top issue. It's like super important. On those apps you can download and where you can check air quality based on several indicators and sensors that people or organizations put on their balconies, on the streets and so on. Bishkek in wintertime is one of the 4 most air polluted cities in the world, according to some of these apps.
Yeah.
So it's really a problem. So how would you address like air pollution in your framework? Is it more important, like, because this discourse on climate change is fueled by several problems, right? It's a transversal issue. But how does air pollution here play?
Oh, that's a very interesting question, actually. And I will try to answer that. I think like it's what comes from the top of my head is just that it can play 2 very different roles. In the, like on the one hand, it actually makes people think about the environment. So it's good. So they're looking at air pollution, they still can easier for them to get into climate change issue. On the other hand, as this is the first issue, the pressing issue, visible one, it can just take attention, because I hope it will be solved soon, but realistically, it definitely takes some time. So it will make people actually longer to be concerned about air pollution. It will be taking a while for climate change to come to public agenda. So I think this would both kind of stimulate the wider environmental concern, but still it makes us to wait longer for people to be concerned about climate.
You can be sure that in some of the Central Asian capital cities or major cities, NGOs, local associations and so on do mobilize and try to really put this question on the agenda. So I guess it will be quite feasible for you to access interesting data.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. My biggest hopes about NGOs is definitely in Kyrgyzstan to have good talks.
But air pollution is also, you know, an issue in Almaty, Kazakhstan, and they're trying to solve it. Anyways, so anything else? Because my question was quite very factual and not so theoretical.
Yes, Adrien, I have questions.
Please.
Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm Xavier Rez from the IFAC, and I have a question about you were mentioning Tokayev, and especially what the year when he came to the presidency and when he created this kind of commission to let civil society express some demands about what was happening at that moment in Kazakhstan. And the question was about quite different from what was doing Nazarbayev about some kind of ecological problems. And it seems that Tokayev is more, in a sense, listening to this kind of question, to this kind of issues. So the question is, do you think it's because he tried to be, in a sense, in accordance with the civil society in Kazakhstan, or maybe he's himself more interested in these issues? Or especially also because here in Kazakhstan, we know that there is different levels of politics. So even if Tokayev is the president of Kazakhstan, he cannot do everything he wants in the country, as it was the case before with Nazarbayev, which is more powerful in the place. So maybe this kind of different levels of possibility to do something on ecological issue, and the real say will of Tokayev to do something. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very interesting question. And actually, I'm not sure how I can answer that, because I cannot know, right, what Tokayev thinks. But what can I see? It's this. Many experts been sharing that this concept of the listening state is very much works selectively. And if we look at the very good example, it calls Association of Environmental NGOs in Kazakhstan. Basically, it's under the governmental within a governmental structure, and the president of this association. So they collect all the public opinion about environmental issues, and the head of this association is daughter of Nazarbayev. So we see how this.
Which one? Because
public issues are still very, very much connected from not only Tokayev, but Nazarbayev, who still has a big influence in the country. So I think that probably and hopefully Tokayev has aspirations, and in face of really climate change, you see how it happens in the region. There is definitely some concern should be awakened, but still I think that it's pretty much to create the image of Kazakhstan as a democratic state at the global level as well. I think it helps play some role. If I answer, so I think they are both. It's like fighting climate change, still not losing, with benefits. So it would benefit the country climate change wise. It would benefit the country image and probably some finance wise. I guess it's that, if I answered.
Yes, and complying to global norms is very much one of the aims of its foreign policy. So
yeah, exactly.
Okay. And a final comment by Irene. She says that air pollution is also an issue in smaller towns in Kyrgyzstan, in Jalabad, for instance, where she did some measures, and yes, measures were high. Okay, if there are no final questions or comments, I think slowly we can move to a conclusion. Oh yes, another question by Anissa Hasanova. While understanding climate change discourse in politics realm, what can you say about not environmentally friendly projects funded by Chinese stakeholders and BRI? Why they still get away through despite some local discontent? That's a major question.
Major question and major issue. And yeah, it more sounds like a factual comment rather than a question, because yeah, as I was saying, I think these green aspirations, etc., it's very much still just in discourse, because we see a lot of mismatch between actually political action and those facilities that China outsources its mining industries in Central Asian countries, like in Kazakhstan in particular, where some conflicts are awakened by that, because locals don't get even a job, their cities getting polluted, they don't get a job in the industry, Chinese people coming there to work, so it just actually poses a threat also to social security. Why the state does that? Because it also, like in case of Kazakhstan, because I definitely am more familiar now with that, it aspires to get into top sorties economies by 2050s. So these economic questions would be always very important, and probably more important than that climate discourse, I guess.
Well, our colleague Pierre Chabal considers that China will be drawn towards an obligation to seek soft power via environmental management of BRI.
That's a very good point. Yeah, I will agree with that. Very good point. Thank you. Yeah.
So I feel, there is much to discuss further, and I would really hope that we can organize a physical meeting in Bishkek, in the IFIAC premises, by the end of 2022. I'm sorry, we have to plan, further on because so many things are ahead. But thank you again.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure.
You're very welcome. And I hope you can keep in touch with some members of the public. If needed, they can write to us and we can then forward to you their email addresses and so on. This is, also one of the meanings of such webinars, because before the pandemic, we used to exchange business cards, right, over a cup of coffee. So you can still do this. If it helps, we can also keep the webinar session open for like 5 or 10 minutes for the people to exchange views. Then we can stop just recording because I repeat that it was recorded. Thank you, everyone. I see some members in the public who soon are planning also to go to the region for fieldwork. So this is really nice. I'm really happy that IFIAC is a platform. So Alina, thank you. Great job.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to see everyone here. Thank you all for your questions, for your time. And I very much hope to see you in Kyrgyzstan and or maybe in some other parts of Central Asia occasionally. It would be amazing. Yeah.